Ayo, naughty steppers, what is up? It is time for another album review, but not just any album, but the greatest album of all time. So strap yourselves in, folks, because this is going to be one hell of a review. I mean, it is the greatest album of all time, after all. Now, to be honest, it's just going to be the same as any other standard review on this channel, really. Dodge and Fuski are back in full force as actual Dodge and Fuski and not just Dodge. For the first time since their all-killer, no-filler EP released just over a year ago. With their first full-length album released under their very own Disciple Records. Partners in crime once again, having separated for a few years after their departure from Never Say... well, we won't get into that. With Rob formulating Disciple Records in that time and bringing the likes of Virtual Riot, Barely Alive and Dubloads further into the dubstep limelight and releasing a smattering of EPs and singles along the way. And Chris, as their promotional videos would suggest, just chilling somewhere on a farm in southwest England in that period of time. But now they are back, and with 13 huge tracks to unleash to bassheads the world over. Well, 12 tracks really, but we'll get into that later on. Now, the first thing that really took me aback with this album when thinking about it conceptually was the sheer energy to it from start to finish. For the most part, Rob and Chris do very well to refashion their old sound into newer, more trendy and relevant styles, if you would. Combining very ostentatious lead melodies with marauding percussive sequences and a wealth of drops that, whilst adhering to dubstep sounds, clearly lend from the RIDDIM genre in terms of structure. This pattern takes shape in the unerringly bouncy drops that have a say in a multitude of tracks on this album. Whether it's the collaborations with Phase 1 and Ivory, or originals from the duos such as Exposure and Little Blip. And even further down the line towards the end of the album with tracks like Massacre and Streets of Rage. An extremely welcomed aspect in the first few tracks, but when it gets to Dog Eat Dog and beyond, I feel it just becomes too much of a fixture across the project. To the extent that you're genuinely left wondering whether they ran out of ideas on the dubstep front. There's a genuine sameness resulting in those tracks mentioned at the end, not really offering anything new and being more fillers than killers. Of those tracks, however, I did really enjoy the drop to the Phase 1 collaboration, an absolute howitzer full of menace and verve that actually stands as a fantastic representation of their combined styles. Moreover, on Little Blip, that bounciness is presented in a very forceful way, with a true interaction between all of the sounds that is seemingly absent on other tracks. I also really enjoyed the lead towards the second drop on this song, with those electrifying squeals building and being incorporated into the drop very well, even as it's glitched out. But it's with tracks like Exposure and Dog Eat Dog that we get that sense of overkill with this approach. And by the time we get to Massacre and Streets of Rage, it honestly seems like the energy has been completely sapped from that method. The former sounding like a kind of dumbed down rehash of Virtual Riot's Pray for RIDDIM. But, you know, in spite of this, I do find myself returning to the fact that the energy on this thing is just momentous, it's huge, it's great. This translates into them dipping into several other genres, all of which come in collaborations with other high-profile artists. Two of which, in joining with Dubloads and Ulasile respectively, constitute as a couple of my favourites on the album. The first, Hungry Hippos, is a brilliantly executed minimalistic house track that pulls you into its depths with a seriously infectious beat. Evidence of Dodge and Fuski implementing the bouncy aspect of this album into a completely different tempo altogether. I love how the emphasis is on the backdrop, with the growls and snarls few and far between, each one given its own space. In turn, they are accentuated more, having a larger presence in the song overall. I mean, they sound like Hungry Hippos. And the Ulasile collaboration, Take Me Over, brings together a dark, earthy, underground introduction with a subtle but purely wonky drop that's just a very nice direction change for the album at that point. I'm a massive fan of how this one twists this way and that, very sinewy, loads of great effects, nothing too showy about it, you know, it just cracks on with minimal fuss. And in saying that it isn't as showy and in your face as other tracks on the album, I'm explaining that it is a clear anomaly across the 13 songs. Around half of them clock in at just below the 3-minute mark or at the 3-minute mark, And this is without me even including the 2-minute interlude entitled Silence is Golden. See why I said it's effectively 12 tracks now? And with this many impact tracks, as it were, you know, songs that get to the drop quickly and don't have too much surrounding those parts, this album doesn't feel like it's telling a story as much as it's just a collection of bangers, making it feel much more like a super lengthy EP than anything resembling an album. I was going to say this in the review originally, but I forgot. But on that note, there is an extent almost to which this sounds at points more like a Disciple showcase or compilation than an album from Dodge and Fuski, such as the wealth of influences that they get from outside their own production from those other aforementioned artists. Pretty much all of whom are either on Disciple currently or have just left, as is the case with Dubloads. But in all honesty, this isn't anything less than I expected. Whilst they do have those epic storytelling tunes like Python, their music is almost entirely catered to the drop culture. Meaning introduction, then a swift build, then a drop, then an outro fashioned somewhat from the introduction. Impact music, as I said. So when the final track, Turn It Up, with Prototype comes around, and it's bereft of that grand orchestral ending sequence, I'm really not too bothered because that's not what I came for. As a quick side note on the topic of that track, I think it's another very interesting direction that the album takes, with that drum and bass, breakbeat-esque bass. Similarly, two others on this album, however, whilst the percussion is great, what lays on top just doesn't quite wow enough. But overall, you know what you're going to get with Dodge and Fuski, even though I feel like this could have been experimented with a little bit more in this album format. But for me, the introduction suffices in that respect. I mean, it's arguably the hardest part of an album to get spot on, but that opening speech captures exactly what they are about. Bringing the ideas of rebirth and redemption in, all the while through that comedic slant that we know and love them for. And I must say, that guy, whoever he is, he's a seriously good impressionist. And as with pretty much any album, this one has its moments of real coherence between all of its sounds, and others where it's just a bit too wild and lacking in harmony between its components. On the good side, the first full track that we get, Back With A Vengeance, is a vintage, animated and playful number from the duo, harking back to their old selves, not only in their sound but also in their multiple references to their legendary track Python. The first part of the melody used midway through the drop, and the "now for something completely different" vocal sample being cut off expertly just before the drop comes in. Very gripping dubstep, contorted and mechanical but with a real swing to it, a very impactful way to kick things off. Moreover, the transitioning between the hilarious hotel lobby recording of Exposure and its heavier surrounding parts is seamless and very well managed. There's also the sensational reggae-infused take on the theme tune to the Western film The Good, the Bad and the Ugly in the introduction to Dog Eat Dog, which I just wish could have been a little bit longer. It's just so jumpy and easy to vibe to. Rob says that's enough of that, but honestly, Mr. Talbot, I don't think I quite agree. And whilst I'm not too keen on the initial drop in that track, as I said, the way that it brings in that "you see this shit get hot" vocal sample, manipulating it more and more as it progresses, is very cheeky. I'm also really feeling the oozy and inviting, bleepy bloopy introduction to Little Blip, just a really nice coming together of sounds. But, as I said, this album certainly isn't without its drawback moments, the majority of which come towards the end. Like the Tom Cruise sample from Tropic Thunder used in Massacre. I mean, come on guys, that has been used so many times. It works pretty well with the sounds they use in the introduction and the drop, but really, they could have been a little bit more unique here. Furthermore, the drops, as previously mentioned, just seem to get increasingly directionless for the most part as the album progresses. Just a little aimless and not sure exactly of what they want to do or what purpose they want to serve. But I'm by no means saying here that this album is a steady decline, because it has those tracks towards the end that inject a much needed freshness that is absent in the earlier parts of the album. It was interesting, for example, seeing Infect's technique being included in a faster paced song, completely detached from his staunch RIDDIM style. So it has that balance of better and worse in the first and second halves of the album, making it a pretty balanced project from track 1 to track 13. It's extremely rare that anyone is going to come out of listening to a bass-heavy album and say that they liked every track. At least Rob and Chris have actually gone out there and produced an album, for many the pinnacle of a musician's career. And, above all else, Dodge and Fuski, in my opinion, serve as the #1 reminder for dubstep being the best genre for not taking itself too seriously. With Silence is Golden and the many amusing vocal recordings throughout being evidence enough of that. And besides, there are some real bangers on here that I'll be listening to continually throughout this year and beyond. And on that note, in terms of a favourite from this album, then I'm finding it difficult to choose between Back with a Vengeance, Hungry Hippos, and Take Me Over. There are parts I love from pretty much every track, but for me these three are the most rounded. And they're all completely different, each with their own genre and mood, so it's hard to choose between them. And in terms of a recommendation, if you enjoyed this album, then I would just say listen to everything that Dodge and Fuski have put out leading up to this. I think it would be good for anyone listening to this album to have an understanding of where they have come from to get to this point. I'm also going to point you in the direction of an interview I did with Dodge for Disciple back in 2016. So yeah, check that out if you're interested. I will link it in the description down below. Woo! Big ol' ass review, boy. And so that is that for another review on the Nawtystep channel, this time on the greatest album of all time by Dodge and Fuski. Thank you very much, and as always, for watching. Like this video, share it about, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to hit the notification bell if you're enjoying the content so that you can be alerted anytime I upload to the Nawtystep channel. Moreover, leave a comment down below with your thoughts on the greatest album of all time, or so called. What did you guys make of it? Next to my head, there should be some other album reviews on the channel if you enjoyed this one. And don't forget to like and follow Nawtystep across all social media if you haven't already. With everything linked, including some past Dodge and Fuski stuff and the interview I did with Dodge back in 2016 in the description box down below. And lastly, and as always, if it's naughty, then you know. So be sure to keep it naughty and stay safe. And I shall see you all, Naughty Steppers, in the next one. But for now, we must go our separate ways. Peace out.